Why didn't the US stop China 20 years ago? Many may wonder, why didn't the US take action to halt China's rise when it was still emerging as a global power? Did China's ascent truly rely on the US's goodwill? It's not that the US overlooked China or made a miscalculation. It's simply that China was incredibly forward, thinking, driven by unmatched energy and resilience. Since World War II, any economy that posed a serious threat to US hegemony was suppressed. During the Cold War, the US's primary rival was the Soviet Union, not China. At the time, China was an agricultural country with little global influence. Despite this, no one could predict that, 70 years later, China would become a superpower. The US focused its efforts on countering the Soviet Union, and after the nuclear arms race made a large-scale war impossible, both nations engaged in a Cold War, attempting to outpace each other economically. The US had two primary strategies to undermine the USSR. First, they aimed to erode the Soviet Union ideologically by emphasizing the superiority of market economies over planned ones. By shifting the global economic focus to GDP, the US showed its advantage in the currency-based market economy, sowing doubts within the Soviet system. Second, the US targeted Soviet oil, which was a major revenue source, manipulating oil prices by increasing output in the Middle East and pushing Western countries to sell. Oil prices plummeted, severely harming the Soviet economy already weakened by the Afghan War, triggering widespread domestic instability and contributing to the USSR's collapse in 1991. At the time, China was just beginning its reform and opening up process. By 1992, Deng Xiaoping's Southern Tour laid the groundwork for China's economic boom, but China's GDP in 1991 was just $380 billion. Compared to the US's $6.16 trillion, a gap of 16 times. With Japan, Germany, France, and the UK already surpassing $1 trillion in GDP, the US was more concerned with Europe and Japan than China. The formation of the European Union in 1993, the introduction of the euro, and Europe's move toward military autonomy in the late 1990s all posed significant challenges to US global dominance. In response, the US instigated conflicts in Europe, particularly in the Balkans, to destabilize the Eurozone, weakening the euro and strengthening the dollar. This strategy created energy dependencies and inflamed refugee crises, further increasing European reliance on the US military. Meanwhile, Japan was primarily seen as an economic rival to be manipulated, forcing Japan to reinvest its surplus back into US financial markets and accept the Plaza Accord, which made its goods less competitive. This led to Japan's lost decades of stagnation. It wasn't until 2010, when China surpassed Japan to become the world's second largest economy, that the US truly began to shift its focus. In 2011, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced the pivot to Asia, marking the start of a more direct strategy to counter China. Prior to this, the US was distracted by the Soviet Union's collapse, the 9/11's attacks, and the wars in the Middle East, which diverted attention away from China's rise. For 30 years, China adopted a strategy of restraint, focusing on internal development and avoiding unnecessary conflicts. But as China became a global economic giant, the US started provoking tensions, hoping that conflicts would weaken China's economy. The US has attempted to escalate tensions over territorial disputes, but China has remained calm, avoiding military confrontation whenever possible. Some critics wondered why China didn't stand up to the US more aggressively. However, any direct confrontation would risk an economic blockade, isolation, and prolonged instability. China's strategy has always been to avoid conflict while building strength. Today, China's economy is the second largest in the world, and its industrial capacity leads globally. In areas such as high-speed rail, renewable energy, solar power, wind power, and 5G technology, China has taken the lead. It has developed cutting-edge weapons and advanced military technology, including the J-35 stealth fighter and the H-6K bomber, further closing the technological gap with the West. China's technological rise, from its space program to the development of the Beidou satellite system, has begun to break the West's technological dominance. The country's military advancements, such as intercontinental missiles and high-tech fighter jets, show that China is now on par with the West and has developed the ability to counteract U.S. efforts to maintain global dominance. China has reached a point where it no longer faces the same threats it once did. The U.S.'s attempts to suppress China's growth have failed, and the nation is now set on its path to the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. With its technological, economic, and military strength, China is no longer a nation that can be easily intimidated. As the country moves forward, it will continue to assert its position, making clear that anyone who challenges China will face consequences, no matter how far they are from its borders.